So many people are on time. Amazing.
I know, right? Good morning, afternoon, evening, next day. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here and joining us today. It's lovely to see familiar and new faces. So the way we're going to do this today is I'm Rabbi Cat Zavis from Beyt Tikkun, a synagogue without walls. I'm here in Berkeley on the Lonely Land, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you. We are going to keep you all muted, and there will be an opportunity for questions and answers, but you will send those to me and the host, all of us, Hanan and Noor, and we will ask the questions for you, and we will hear the answers so that we can make sure we get as many questions in as possible. So Hanan will start and share for a bit, and then Noor will. And based on the brief conversation we just had, I know that today is going to be a very rich conversation with perhaps some differing perspectives and viewpoints. So that's a wonderful opportunity for us to practice our listening skills with our hearts open and our hearts open with compassion and care for all of us and for all the people in the land of Israel and Palestine. So I'm going to turn it over to Hanan in 1 second. I want to center us before we get started and as people are still arriving. So I'm just going to invite everyone to take a few deep breaths. Feel your feet on the ground or your floor. Maybe roll your shoulders if you're feeling any tension in your shoulders, or shake your jaws, whatever you're needing to do to just feel yourself arrive and open your hearts and your minds. And I always like to say, take a deep breath in. And as you breathe out, release anything that you've brought with you that you're still holding, that you want to let go of for this time. And then you can take another deep breath in, and on your out breath, let go of anything you're holding that you're thinking about, worrying about, that you have to do when this call is done, because it'll still be there. It's not going to go anywhere. So breathe that out and release that. And on your next in-breath and out-breath, allow yourself to arrive and ground yourself in this moment, in this time. Thank you all for being here. We will hand it over now to Hanan.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Hanan Schlesinger. I'm one of the founders of Roots, in Hebrew Shorashim, in Arabic Judur, the Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation. We founded Roots about 10 years ago. So in a nutshell, I'm going to talk a few minutes about Roots, and then I'm going to talk about 3 other things. In other words, the talk will be divided into 4 sections. So first, to tell you something about Roots. We work in the heart of the conflict, that is to say the West Bank, what many of our Jewish members call Judea and Samaria, the biblical terms for what most of the world today calls the West Bank. We bring together neighbors. There are lots of Jews living in the West Bank. There are lots of, and even more, Palestinians living there. The situation is today and 2 months ago and 5 years ago and 10 years ago, for a long, long time, the situation has been that Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs live very, very, very close together with almost no contact. Of course, you know that the 2 sides speak different languages, they have different cultures, different religions. There's different school systems, whether that's kindergarten or up to and through high school and college, completely separate. Not only the education systems are separate, the health systems are separate, the hospitals in the West Bank and the clinics, the dentists, completely separate. The transportation systems are completely separate, whether it's buses or taxis, Jewish Israelis and Palestinian Arabs will not be in the same taxi or bus together. So really everything is separate. Economics is separate. We have different calendars, different systems of time. We know nothing about the other side, literally nothing. And it's pretty clear that under those circumstances, in which someone you understand as the enemy lives very near you, but you know nothing about them, you have a lot of stereotypes, a lot of bigotry, perhaps racism, resentment, fear, lots and lots of fear, and especially denial of the other side's identity. It looks to us in Roots that this type of denial of the other side, this type of fear, this type of resentment that we live in, this kills. People kill and are killed because they don't know the other they live right next to, because they're afraid of them, because they resent them, because they know that they are the enemy, they are dangerous, they are violent, and this cuts in both directions. Israelis toward Palestinians, Palestinians towards Israelis. Roots set itself the goal, among other things, of reducing the fear, reducing the violence, reducing the lack of recognition, bring the two sides to understand each other and to be transformed into someone who knows, who recognizes, who empathizes with trust and can enter into partnership with the other side. So how do we do this? What we do goes against the grain of what both societies feel and think and live. The foundation for the way we do it is by bringing the two sides to meet each other. Roots has created the only joint Israeli-Palestinian community center in the whole West Bank, literally the only shared space. It's called the Dignity Center. We call it in our language Merkaz Karama, Merkaz being a Hebrew word for center, Karama being the Arabic word for dignity. The Dignity Center has activities like a normal community center. We have programs for little kids, photography workshops for middle school kids. We have a youth group for high school kids that meets twice a month. We have a group for the alumni of the youth group. We have a summer camp. We have a day camp. We have photography workshops for women. We have a women's study group. We have 3 different interfaith dialogue groups. We have storytelling workshop. We have playback for women. We have political discussions. Once a month, we come together for an activity in which we hear not a lecture, but a description of a Palestinian village and Israeli settlement that are right near each other. They may even have the same name. We hear a resident of each place describing what their life is like. Very eye-opening, lots of political discussions. And ultimately, we're trying to move from a place. No, actually, I'll leave that for later. I'll say something else. We work on 2 levels. The first level is humanization. Many, many, many local Israelis and local Palestinians think there's a monster on the other side, someone who's not really human, complete ignorance of what's going on there, complete blindness. After you meet someone from the side and you do photography with them, or you have a discussion with them, or you just come together for an iftar, a meal during Ramadan, you begin to discover that the other side is a human being pretty much like you. And this is surprising for many of us. And I'd say we're embarrassed that we're surprised, but we're still surprised. It takes 1 meeting, it takes 2 meetings, it takes 3 meetings, and we begin to realize that we were wrong. It was ridiculous what we thought about them. They're really human like us. And of course, residually in our mind, we retain our prejudices for longer than that. But it's not that hard, and it's not a process that takes that long to get over the demonization and discover a human being. That's the easy part of the work. The harder part of the work is coming face to face with the fact that the other side, who you just discovered to be human, is the bearer of a national political identity that contradicts yours. Contradicts to the degree that according to their identity, you don't exist. And according to your identity, they don't exist. Both Israelis and Palestinians believe they can tell the other side who they are. I know who you are and I'll tell you. But after you meet and you get into deep discussions week after week and month after month, and the other side is always saying the same things about their side and saying the same things about your side, you begin to realize that you know nothing of who they are and they know nothing of who you are. And instead of each side telling the other, I know who you are, you have to listen and let them tell who they are, and they may listen when you tell who you are. I'll tell you that many Israelis around where I live, settlers, perhaps most of them, are certain there's no such thing as Palestinians. They don't exist. They're only Arabs. They're just like those in Saudi Arabia or Jordan or Egypt. So let them go back to Saudi Arabia where they came from. And the vast majority of Palestinians are certain there's no such thing as the Jewish people. It's just a religion. And since it's just a religion, just a faith, it doesn't require land, doesn't require nationality. So go back to Russia where you came from. Go back to Los Angeles. Go back to Toronto. Why did you come to take my land? And after we have these discussions, time after time, you begin to realize that you've been building your identity upon the nullification of the other side's identity, and she's been building her identity upon the nullification of your identity. If the other side says what they say about themselves, and I admit so many people are saying the same thing about their people, so many Palestinians, no matter where they're coming from, have the same identity, that must be who they think they are. That must be who they are. And the same thing on the other side. When a Palestinian meets Jewish Israelis who are talking about a 3,000-year connection to the land, are talking about being 2,000 years in exile, about coming home, that the Zionist movement is a national liberation movement, the Jewish people coming home after all those years of exile, that must be what they really think. And then we have to come to terms with the fact that they are who they say they are, and they are who they say they are. That there's really such a thing as the Palestinian people. And there's really such a thing as the Jewish people. And there's really such a thing as the land of Palestine. And there's really such a thing as the land of Israel. That's not politics, that's history, that's identity. And then the most gut-wrenching realization of them all, which is that the borders of the historical land of Palestine and the borders of the historical land of Israel are the exact same borders. From the river to the sea is all Palestine, and from the sea to the river is all historical Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. That's not politics, and it's not something that can change. That's identity and history. And what happens in Roots is that we have now hundreds, thousands of Israelis and Palestinians who've come to discover the humanity of the other side, and even further have begun to discover the truth of the identity of the other side. When I say identity, that's number one, who they understand themselves to be, and their understanding on both sides of their belonging to the land. The Palestinians belong to the land of Palestine, and the Israeli Jews belong to the land of Israel. And like I said, those two lands are the same land. They have the same borders. You can say that the land has two identities. And if you want to look at the land as Mother Earth has two children, both connected to the womb that they were born from. That's where they live, that's where they're connected, and they're not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere because their identities tie them to the land. You see, most Israelis and most Palestinians, I'm sorry to say, go to sleep at night dreaming that the other side will disappear tomorrow, because we know they don't belong. They don't belong. Palestinians say the Israelis don't belong, and the Israelis say the Jews don't belong. But through the work of Roots, the humanization and the coming to terms with the accepting, the recognizing of the other side's identity, you begin to realize the other side's not going anywhere. And if they're not going anywhere, that means we're destined to live with them and them with us for a long, long time. And when you really come to that conclusion, a deep sense, and internalize it, it fries your brain, because you realize that you've been understanding the present and the future in a fashion that's totally wrong and unrealistic. You've always seen yourself, your people here in the future without them. But if they're not going anywhere, that means I have to re-understand what's happening today and I have to re-understand what's going to happen tomorrow. Either we live together and kill each other, or we live together in peace, but there's no other way. We're not going to be here, whether we means the Jews or we means the Palestinians. We're not going to be here without them. We're going to be here with them, whoever them is. And Roots brings us to that place of two truths in one heart. Two truths in one heart and two peoples in one land. And I'll say at the end of this first part of my presentation that this deep mutual recognition of the other side's identity, the other side's belonging to the land, for us is the foundation of a future peace settlement. We in Roots are preparing the human groundwork for our people-to-people work for a future peace settlement that grants dignity and equality, freedom, security, and human rights to both peoples in this little sliver of land that we both call home. That's the fun part of my presentation. Now, we'll take a 5-second break, which is now over, and we'll move to the second part of my presentation. I want to say a few words about Israeli society since October 7th. As probably most of you know, Israeli society was horrified and traumatized by the events of October 7th. I think that many of us are living with nightmares. We're living in deep fear. We're locking our doors in the daytime, the nighttime, the fashion we never did. We're looking over our shoulders. We don't trust them, the Arabs, the Palestinians. And Israeli society has very, very much united around the understanding that we cannot continue on until Hamas is eliminated. You hear that from the government, but it seems to me that 95% of Israelis are there. And when I say 95%, I don't mean if that includes Israeli Arabs or not. I admit I don't know. But certainly in Israeli Jewish society, that's what everyone is feeling and thinking. That despite the price on the Israeli side, and despite the price on the Palestinian side of innocents in Gaza, we're going to do everything but everything to completely eliminate Hamas. I'm not saying my position, I'm saying the position of Roots. That's where Israeli society is holding. I'll also tell you that on the Israeli news, in the newspapers, the only mention of the casualties of innocents in Gaza is numbers. It always says the Gaza Health Ministry, whose numbers and statistics we cannot trust because it's run by Hamas, says that such and such amount of people were killed today, such and such amount of people were killed by us, the Israelis, for the past week, the past month. As far as I know, in the newspapers I read, there's no pictures of the casualties. There's very little pictures of the destruction, except if it's backdrop to our soldiers. There's no human interest stories about Palestinians being killed in Gaza. It's just numbers. So Israelis are not thinking about the human price in Gaza. They're just not. And I want to tell you that a lot of Israelis have told me, and I quote, "I don't have 1 ounce of empathy for the people in Gaza. They brought it upon themselves by electing Hamas and not overthrowing Hamas after they came into power." A lot of people who I would consider good human beings are clearly saying, I have no compassion and no empathy and no thoughts for anything but my own people. The Palestinians in Gaza, they can go to hell. And that's a quote. Not a quote from me, but that's a quote. So, okay, that's enough for what I'm saying about the second part of my talk, about what's going on in Israeli society. And of course, I'll ask that, of course, everyone knows soldiers or civilians who were killed on October 7th, or soldiers have been killed since then. Everyone knows, someone who knows one of the hostages. We are living with the pain and the grief and the mourning and the funerals every single day. Okay, so that's the second part of my talk, a little overview of what's happening here in Israeli society. The third part of my talk is about what's going on in Roots today on the level of discourse between Israelis and Palestinians. So there's a third part of my talk, the discourse in Roots between Israelis and Palestinians today. So first I'll tell you that we cannot meet in person Israelis and Palestinians because since October 7th, that's about 7.5 weeks, all of the Palestinian villages and towns and cities have been under Israeli military closure. Very little Palestinian traffic on the roads. Most of them can't go to work or to school or to visit family or anything. Very little commerce. Everyone is in lockdown, which means they cannot come to our center to meet. The Israelis are not in lockdown. We can go pretty freely. But I want to tell you that Roots activists have not met in person for the last 7.5 weeks, not only because the Palestinians are not allowed by the army to come, but also because neither side really wants to meet the other side now. Even among people who've been involved in Roots for a year or 2 or 3, people, most of them, not everyone, does not want to see the other side. They don't have room in their heart to hear the truth, the narrative, the experience of the other side. So we're meeting over Zoom. And most of the Zoom meetings, not all, but most are Israelis separately and Palestinians separately. Because again, the two sides not only can't bear to be in the same room together, they can't even bear to be in the same Zoom room together at this point, except for the leadership of Roots that is meeting together, jointly Israelis and Palestinians. Basically, the fault lines, as I see them, between Israelis and Palestinians in Roots right now, are on 2 levels. The Israelis say, I can't talk to any Palestinian who doesn't condemn the massacre of October 7th, who doesn't condemn it unequivocally, with a full stop, with a period at the end of the combination, at the end of the condemnation. And Palestinians are saying, what happened was a massacre. I'm talking Palestinians in Roots. We condemn it. And at the same time, you have to know that it had a context. There's background. Something was going on called occupation, called oppression, called lack of Palestinian sovereignty. Israelis, when they hear a condemnation, even a full-throated condemnation that then goes on and gives context, like, by the way, the head of the UN did a few weeks ago, when Israelis hear that context, for better or for worse, they hear it as a watering down of the condemnation. They hear it as a justification, even if it's not meant in that fashion. And Palestinians are saying, rightfully, I'm sorry, I don't want to give my opinion, Palestinians are saying that if you don't mention the context, it sounds like you are absolving yourself of any responsibility. If you condemn the massacre without giving context, it's like you're saying that we should go back to the way things were before the massacre. And we Palestinians cannot do that. What happened, the situation before the massacre, was not what we want. We were oppressed, as we are, say the Palestinians. We live under occupation. So here you have the first of 2 fault lines, even between peace activists today, about the condemnation, as I said. Number 2, the second fault line, which is even more serious, which is the following. Palestinians are saying, of course, that as peace activists who believe in nonviolence, we in Roots should be calling for a ceasefire. We should be calling for non-violence. That's what we believe in. Violence, military attack, is not the way to solve our differences. Just like what Hamas did is not the way to solve our differences. So what Israel is doing, attacking Gaza from the air and from the ground, is not the way to solve our differences. It's not going to bring peace. And Israelis in Roots, again, even peace activists, are saying the same thing that the majority of Israelis are saying in society at large, which is that Hamas is so evil, so bent on destroying the state of Israel, so anti-Semitic, that you can't talk to them, that the only way to bring peace for Israelis and Palestinians is to first eliminate Hamas. In other words, violence, in rare cases, like this one, is the path to peace. That's what many, many Israelis, even Israeli peace activists, are saying. And so here you see the second fault line, even among peace activists. What that means is that the two sides in Roots can barely talk to each other today. I'm not talking about the leadership. The leadership can talk to each other, but among the rank and file, many cannot talk to each other because neither side can give the other side what they need. Neither side can say what the other side wants them to say. And as long as the other side doesn't say what I want them to say at this point of emotion, of pain, of trauma, then each side feels the other side is not my partner anymore. They're letting me down. Now they are showing their true colors. They're not partners. They don't get it. And that's a very, very serious situation. That's the third part of my talk. And now 5 minutes for the last part of my talk. The last part of my talk is to describe to you what Roots is doing today. If before October 7th, we had summer camps and day camps and activities almost every day, so these days, like I said, our Dignity Center is empty. The meetings we're having are over Zoom, and many of them are each side separately. Very few of them are two sides together. In addition to these meetings, what we're doing is we've set up a framework for combating settler violence. You probably heard that settler violence has gotten much worse since October 7th, partially because of the atmosphere of greater hate and greater fear that many settlers feel that if we don't get them, the Palestinians, they're going to get us right away. So we have to go out and keep them away from us, attack them, distance us from our settlements and from our fields. And there's also been an exacerbation of settler violence because the Ministry of National Security in the Israeli government has been arming settlers in self-defense, but those weapons are also being used to attack Palestinians. And the army seems to be doing very little to combat it. The army is more concerned with other things these days, as you can imagine. The army doesn't have the intelligence in the field, doesn't have the manpower to be every place at every time. It doesn't know where to be, what's happening. So we've set up a framework of Palestinian informants. I think the word is informats. I'm not sure how you say the word. And Israelis, people living in settlements on the Israeli side, Palestinians who have their ears to the ground. And we've established a direct channel to the highest echelons of the army, so that when in real time we hear that attack is being planned or attack is at the beginning of being carried out, we can get the word to the army in real time. And they promised us to come and put an end to it. There's no guarantees this is going to work. It's just at the beginning. We've set up this system in the southern Hebron Hills where settler violence is quite serious. And we're also setting up another system in the Jordan Valley and in the northern West Bank, what Jews call Samaria. And this is really, really central to the work of Roots, really, really important to us. The next thing is I want to talk about our relief project. Most Palestinians these days have no livelihood because they're under closure, as I mentioned earlier. So we've collected money and we began relief work, giving out sums of money to about 100 Palestinian families connected to roots in the area of our Dignity Center, which is south of Jerusalem, between Bethlehem and Hebron. We're hoping, although we haven't raised the money yet, to give out a equivalent sum of money in December as well. The first time was November. We hope to do it in December as well. We've also collected money to help Israelis who have been evacuated from the north or from the south and are presently have been evacuated to the area around our center, our Dignity Center. Money for trauma therapy for them and for activities for kids. And also we've given small sums of money to Israelis who are out of work, Israelis working in tourism who are out of work because of the war. And we hope to repeat that same sum of money for Israelis in December, just like we're hoping to repeat it for Palestinians in December. Another thing we're doing is encouraging all our activists to reach out one-on-one to someone from the other side. Pick up the phone and call a Palestinian friend, someone who've met, Palestinian, call an Israeli. If we can't talk about politics today, we can't talk about identity, at least we can show the human side of things and keep the bridges of connection open so they don't collapse. And of course, we're spending a lot of time in leadership of thinking about the day after. No one knows what the day after holds. No one knows what it holds for the region, for the country, and no one knows what it holds for peace activism, for roots. Will we be able to go back to meeting? It's not clear. What probably we will need to do is a lot of trauma therapy for each side separately, and then perhaps we'll be able to move with the trauma therapy of the two sides together. But a lot of talking again about what the future holds. And the last thing Roots is doing is talking to people around the world like you who want a little bit of insight of what's going on. Thank you very much.
Ooh. Before you start, Noor, I just want everyone to take a deep breath. Thank you so much, Rabbi Hanan, for your words. A lot of things to reflect about and think about. I'm sure people are feeling challenged and appreciative simultaneously. So thank you very much. And now I'm going to hand it back over to Noor to share his perspective, Palestinian involved in Roots. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Hello, everyone. And thank you for being here with us today. And I will tell you a little bit about myself, and I will talk about what's happening in my area where I live, and also what's happening at Roots, and in large, what's happening with the peace building camp in Palestine and in Israel. So my name is Noor Awad, and I live in Bethlehem, in the city of Bethlehem, south of Jerusalem. And actually, I was born in Amman, Jordan, in 1991. My family lived in Jordan for a while. Originally, my family are from Jerusalem, the area of Jerusalem. My family had lived for many generations, hundreds of years, in a village called Malha, in southwest of Jerusalem, until May and June 1948. My grandparents and my entire family was forced out of their home in Malha and became refugees. They had to live in a refugee camp in the area of Bethlehem. My parents were born in this refugee camp. My parents grew up in Bethlehem during the Jordanian occupation before 1967, and during the Israeli occupation time after 1967. By 1980s, my parents left to Amman. I was born there, and I lived a few years there. But in 1995, something different happened in this story, because in 1995, we were in the middle of the Oslo peace process, and that gave a lot of hope for my parents. They were talking about the end of occupation soon. They were talking about the establishing of a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. And they didn't really talk a lot about our right to go back to our village, which is in west of Jerusalem. But there was enough hope for my parents to start to think to come back to Palestine on the hopes that the occupation will end and that we can have a normal life. And so this is what my parents did. I was only about 4 years old when we came back to live in Palestine. And for me, at the beginning, actually, I felt like we are living a normal life. We live here in Bethlehem. My father used to work in Jerusalem. He used to take me at the weekends on a Friday, actually, to the prayer in Al-Aqsa Mosque in the old city. And we used to go to the beach at the weekends. We go to Jaffa or to Akka in the north. So it felt to me like we are living a normal life. But I was too young to understand the bigger picture, the complicated reality around me. By the year 2000, when I was about 10 years old, the second Intifada started, the second Palestinian uprising started as a result of the failure of the peace process. And the hope that my parents had for a better future very quickly faded away. The Intifada broke out for many reasons, but it was a new chapter in my life here in Palestine, and it was a very violent one. And I start to open my eyes for the reality that I'm actually living. What does it mean to live under occupation? And who I am as Noor, as a Palestinian? Where are my roots? Why we are refugees, even after like 3 generations from what happened in 1948, why we are still refugees. And the reality that I grew up with not only was just violent, but also was very difficult, actually. And I remember that at some point I was like thinking about it and thinking about my future, and I felt really very frustrated from this situation. I felt like I'm stuck, I'm trapped in a situation that I didn't choose, that I didn't create, and I didn't feel like I have responsibility for this situation. So all of what I start to think about is that there's nothing I can do about it, and maybe I should get out. I should go somewhere else. Like my parents, when they were tired of this situation and they decided to move to Jordan, maybe I can move and live somewhere, have a normal life, far away from here, from Palestine and from the occupation and from this situation. So that's how I grew up. That's how, when I was a teenager, that's how I was thinking about it. But of course, I would go back to the question of what is my responsibility? For sure, I can blame other people for the situation. I can blame the Israeli side for what they did to us in 1948. I can blame them for the occupation and for what they are doing to us right now. I can also blame my side. I blame the leadership. I can blame the older generations, like my grandparents, their generation, their time. I can say it's their fault what's happening to us. I can say the same thing about my parents. But at the end, I start to feel that I have to face the question and I have to find an answer to it. And that question is, what's my responsibility? What should I do? And that's at the age of 15 years old. That's how I was thinking about the situation. That's how I felt I have to think about this situation. And when I search for the answer, it seems to me that if I want to continue to live here in my country, in my homeland, I have to work for improving the situation and for fighting the occupation, because it's the #1 reason that makes our life abnormal here, especially in the West Bank. And when I say fight, I mean literally fight, resist against it, with violence, without violence, with any way possible. And so that's how I saw my responsibility as an individual, but also I saw this is my responsibility as part of my people, and this is this is what my generation need to do. We must be the generation that stands up for these circumstances, fight against the occupation, and make sure that future generations will have a better life in our country, in our homeland. And when I saw this is my responsibility, of course, I have to act accordingly. I went out in the protests and I did many things. It's unfortunate that some people in the world would call me or would call anyone who's trying to fight for our freedom as terrorists. But I want to share with you the story, how I found about Roots and how I actually joined this initiative and what does it mean for me today. So the story goes back to about 7 or 8 years from now, when I was actually guiding a group here in the West Bank. I am a tour guide. That's why I guide people around Bethlehem, around the West Bank. Of course, I'm not allowed to guide in Jerusalem or in the Israeli-controlled area. And I was guiding a group of American university students that was in the beginning of 2016. And I was guiding them to the city of Hebron. So this group had been on a tour to both the Israeli and the Palestinian side to learn about both sides. And on their tour, they have already met people on the Israeli side. They had their Israeli guide. They hear the Israeli narrative. They hear an Israeli perspective about the situation. And now they are on the Palestinian side to do the same thing. And I took them to Hebron. I showed them the situation there. Of course, on the way to go between Bethlehem and Hebron, we crossed through Area C, where you see many of the settlements that are built and expanding on the lands of Bethlehem and Hebron and the villages around. We talked about that. We talked about what we call here new facts on the ground, occupation, how it's affecting us, how it's affecting Bethlehem. And there in Hebron, we toured in the old city and we talked about the situation. And also we had the chance to meet some of the local residents there. We had lunch at one family home, and they also described to us their life and what happens to them, the harassment by settlers and soldiers. And by the end of the day, you can say that now my group, which is the students from the United States, have learned some facts and a little bit about the reality of Palestinians under the occupation. Now, before we go back to Bethlehem, where actually the group will stay, we're supposed to meet with an Israeli settler who lives in Hebron. And that wasn't something usual that I actually do on my tours. But for logistical reasons, my group actually will meet with the settler at the end of this tour in Hebron, and I am supposed to bring them to that meeting. Now, here's the thing. I cannot enter, as a Palestinian, I cannot enter these settlements. I'm not allowed. So I thought that I will bring my group to the meeting. Maybe I'll bring them at the entrance of the settlement. We'll hand them over to the settler, and then I will wait for them. But actually, the speaker, he showed up and he said that I also should join them. And then we began to look for a place where I and him can sit together with the group. I don't know if you guys know the old city of Hebron. Maybe some of you have been there, but there is almost no place where an Israeli and Palestinian can sit and talk together. Eventually, he suggested that we go somewhere near the tomb of the patriarchs, near the Ibrahimi Mosque. And it was on the Jewish side. And I'm also not allowed to go there as a Palestinian. There is a military checkpoint that will stop me. But he guided us, and we had a large group. It was about 40 students. And so I walked between the students, and the soldiers didn't see me. And that's how I made it to the Jewish side of the tomb of the patriarch for the first time in my life. We sat there, and he started to speak to us about his story and his perspective. And of course, the students are here and listening from all sides. They are listening from the two sides. They met with Israelis on the different levels of the political spectrum, with left wing, with right wing, with people in the center. So now they are meeting with the settler, and he's telling them about his story. And he shared with us that he actually moved to Israel because that's how he think he's fulfilling his Jewish identity. For him to live in Israel is very connected. It's conditional for him to be Jewish. And so I understood that he was basically sharing with us the idea of Zionism, that he's a Zionist, of course. And he's now explaining to us what Zionism is. And so for him, it was a fulfillment of his identity. As he said, he didn't leave the States, he didn't leave his country because of anti-Semitism, or because it became hard for him to live there, actually, as he said, but rather because he's fulfilling his Jewish identity. And I'm sitting in front of this American Jewish settler who's explaining to me and to us why this is his land. And he basically mentioned two things. One, there is no occupation, and two, there is no Palestinian people. The first time I heard someone saying there is no occupation in my life ever, it was very shocking. What do you mean there is no occupation? Because it's to me, it's a legal and political fact that we live under the Israeli military law here in the West Bank, that we are subjected to the Israeli military actions and Israeli military law and Israeli military courts. So what do you mean there is no occupation? Wasn't really clear or understandable to me. And the second thing, when he said there is no Palestinian people, I felt as if I don't exist. I'm not there. He says that we don't exist. We are only Arabs, and we have 22 Arab countries. But in my experience, I was born in Jordan, and not only that I don't have Jordanian citizenship, and it's very difficult, almost impossible for me to claim Jordanian citizenship, and I don't want it. I'm a Palestinian. But that's not true. We don't have 22 countries. We barely have one, and it's under occupation. And so I left that meeting with him very frustrated, and the group actually felt the same. They listened to him. I think they took it as an example of how settlers actually think, and we left that meeting on our way back to Bethlehem. On the way back, on the same day, we are still supposed to go for one last meeting, and that meeting was at Roots. So Roots, Shorashim, Judur, it's this initiative that I had no idea about in 2016, and I didn't really know anything about it and what's happening there. So I was curious, I wanted to know. And when I called the person who sent me the group in the first place, asking him what this Roots thing, and actually I thought we are meeting just with Rabbi Hanan as another settler who will speak to us. The guy on the phone, he explained to me that Roots is a place where Palestinians and Israeli settlers are meeting. And I asked for what? And he said they are meeting for actually talking about peace. And that sounded like the most ridiculous and the most dangerous thing that I can hear. What do you mean there are settlers and Palestinians from my people who are sitting together talking about peace? It doesn't carry any positive meaning when I hear it for the first time. However, I had to bring the group there. So I actually went with the group, and there was Rabbi Hanan. And for some reason, the Palestinian partner, Ali, who was supposed to talk to us also that day, was not there. So it was only Rabbi Hanan. And Rabbi Hanan actually started to explain to us about his story and who he is, what he's doing here. And he told us many things that day. He began actually talking about his identity as a Jewish, as a settler, as a Zionist. And I remember again feeling, it's the same thing. I'm meeting with another settler, another American settler who's telling me that this is his land. And I felt like there is no point of me sitting and still listening to this. And I wanted to actually leave, but I did not leave the meeting, and I continued to listen until the end. And actually, it was very surprising to me and very challenging when Rabbi Hanan started to share with us his acknowledgement of my people, that there is another people here, but they have a different name, they have a different story, they are connected to this land, and they live under occupation. And I said to myself, this guy now is talking about the truth. He's talking about the reality. So actually, I continued to sit there and listen to what he says. And I remember by the end of his story, I felt like there is someone on the other side who I can talk to. And it was the first time ever in my life I experienced such feeling. Because before that, I actually did meet with Israelis. But the only Israelis I have met until the age of 26, 25 years old were Israeli soldiers at the checkpoints, or when they come to Bethlehem to arrest someone, when they shoot and kill us. That's how I meet Israelis, when I meet them as soldiers. Or settlers from far away, when I see them standing on the road, or when I hear every day or every week about the violence that happens by settlers. I went back to Bethlehem that day thinking about the things that Rabbi Hanan said about his side and my side, and I actually said I must meet with him again. And I did go back to meet with Rabbi Hanan and have more discussions with him. And I would say that day I actually experienced two things when I listened to Rabbi Hanan. One is recognition. There was recognition from himself to my side. And there was even a recognition that he can no longer exercise his identity upon the denying of my identity. But in order for him to live here, it's conditional for him to be here as Jewish, as Zionist, as Rabbi Hanan, he must recognize my identity, and vice versa. And he actually told me that he and Ali, they gave it a name, and that name is two truths in one heart. There are two truths here in this land, and we should put them in one heart. And the second thing that I experienced after I met with Rabbi Hanan and talked to him is empathy. This level of empathy that I did not anticipate or I did not expect to come from someone who is supposed to be on the enemy side. He's supposed to be my enemy. He's a settler, he's a Zionist, he's Israeli. But there was so much empathy when I talked to him. So those things actually allowed me and enabled me to think differently. And instead of thinking that I should just fight on my own against the situation, that actually I can have partners on the other side. And we could together work on making a better future for everyone here. So you can say that's how I find my way to Roots. And I joined Roots. And actually, Roots became the way for me to meet other activists. Some people who are more focused on the political level, some people who more focused on the ground, working in different initiatives and in different organizations. There are some people who have more clear vision about what needs to happen here, and people who have a maybe less of a clear vision of what's happening or what should happen here. So that's how I joined Roots. Now, on the 7th of October, I think the Palestinian side, and especially here where I live in the West Bank, woke up on this situation that was in some way was surprising, but not shocking. And what I mean is that almost every Palestinian expected that the situation in Gaza will explode at some point. This explosion is inevitable. It will happen. It's the result of more than 16 years of the siege on Gaza. And it's part of the dynamic that we have witnessed. It's between the Israeli side and between Hamas. There were cycles of violence, cycles of wars that have been happening. So in this sense, it wasn't shocking to the Palestinian population, but rather was surprising. That's why I find it there's a difference between the two things. I wasn't really yet sure what's exactly going on. I was following the news mostly not on the traditional media. I was actually getting the news on social media, especially on Telegram. Things are posted there very quickly, and I received the news very quickly from what's happening in Gaza and the Gaza envelope. And after several hours, it became clear what happened. Now, we start to think among ourselves, the Palestinians at roots, and I start to think that actually this is something that, of course, we need to talk about, and we need to see how we can react to it. And the first thing that came to my mind, of course, we need to condemn the attacks of Hamas on the 7th of October. There is no question. And we had a conversation with our Israeli partners, but very soon, as Rabbi Hanan actually explained, this conversation actually came to a dead end for the reason that Rabbi Hanan explained and shared with you. After several days, we, the Palestinians, started to experience what we feel was mostly a campaign of revenge. The Israeli side is just about to get us, Palestinians. I don't think that any Palestinian, after several days, felt that this is a war between Hamas and Israel. I think most Palestinians start to feel that this is a war on us, on the Palestinian side. And maybe it's very big for me to say that I want to represent every Palestinian in this, but I would say, at least myself, I feel this is what's happening now. The Israelis are taking revenge of Palestinians in Gaza. They're taking revenge of Palestinians in the West Bank. In the beginning, actually, I thought that the Israeli army maybe did something that's necessary by closing the roads and preventing settlers and Palestinians from getting close to each other, preventing some violence that might happen. But after a few weeks, I start to realize that it's actually what we are living under is a siege. Palestinians we are besieged in our cities and our villages. We barely can go out on the highway on the main road in Area C, while settlers actually in the West Bank are actually driving on the road every day and going back to Jerusalem, going back to almost like a normal life. So for the last 58 days, I haven't left Bethlehem. I can't go anywhere else outside the city. And I consider myself lucky to live in a city in the West Bank because I almost have everything I need here. There is a hospital in our city, there is schools, there are universities. But I heard a lot of stories of Palestinians who are living in villages and had a very hard time, sometimes not able to reach actually to hospitals. The people feel very afraid when they think about leaving their village or their city. And what we are afraid of both the soldiers and the settlers. We are afraid that the soldiers might stop us at the checkpoints on the roads, and we don't know what the soldiers might do. We heard, and not only here, we saw horrific things of soldiers actually arresting people for no reason sometimes. It turned out that many of the people they arrest were workers who were either stuck in Israel after the 7th of October, they couldn't come back, or some people who thought that after a few weeks they could go back to their work, maybe by smuggling, like they used to do before the 7th of October. Many people actually smuggled through different opens in the fence. They were arrested, they were tortured, they were stripped of their clothes, and soldiers did bad things to them, and they even document it. The soldiers themselves document these actions and they post it on social media. And I think it wasn't, I think that the soldiers intentionally posted on social media in order to spread horror among the Palestinian, fear. But this is what will happen to any Palestinian anywhere. As Rabbi Hanan mentioned, we the Palestinians have seen this campaign of arming the settlers. When we see the settlers getting arms, we don't think it's about self-defense. We think this is a way to prepare for another attack against us, and that we, our Palestinians, are going to be killed by these weapons. There are many, many things happened in the last 58 days. It's very terrifying. It's very challenging. It makes even people who believed in making peace on the Palestinian side completely lose the hope that we don't have a partner. We have no one on the other side. As Rabbi Hanan actually maybe mentioned, we actually at Roots failed to even issue a statement, a joint statement about the violence from both sides and about what's happening since the 7th of October. Now, I would say the situation is very difficult and the picture seems to be very dark and that there is no light at the end of the tunnel. But actually, I would say, I would challenge this and I would say there is some hope. I myself was very frustrated and disappointed on some of my partners at Roots for what I consider the failure to stand for our values, the values that we have built this organization on. And I think that this failure did not only happen at Roots exclusively, no. I think it happened in other joint spaces. But I'm also very proud of those organizations and joint Israeli and Palestinian initiatives who were able to overcome the challenge. There are some initiatives who came up with joint statements that I believe it represents me and it represents what I believe. And it represents this process that I went through for the last 7 years of my life. One of it actually is the Arab-Jewish Declaration for Peace that was posted on the Alliance for Middle East Peace organization, and also the Women Wage Peace group. They have issued a joint statement, and I recommend you to read it. So I think there is hope, and I think there are partners. But now I think that this time is very, very challenging for grassroots work. It's almost impossible, actually, for grassroots work to take place right now. To get the people to meet each other, as Rabbi Hanan said, is difficult. On the Palestinian side, we probably start to feel empathy for the Israelis on the 7th of October. I just want to say that I think most Palestinians felt on the 7th of October that after so many years of us being attacked and so many years that we are being oppressed, now we are able to hit back, or many Palestinians saw it as a way that we are hitting them back. Many Palestinians like myself in the peace work saw what happened on the 7th of October was very problematic, because resistance and hitting the enemy back does not mean that I can do everything and anything. But by now, after the campaign of revenge and the genocidal war on Gaza, I think for Palestinians, it's very hard to feel any sort of empathy for the Israeli side. So obviously, to work on the grassroots level, it's more difficult than it ever was. But I think we still can do something, and actually we must do something. I think this is the time for actually political ideas and for political horizon. I think and I believe we can work on the political level. And that means that we should encourage the talk and focus on a new political horizon. We should actually shed the light and actually talk about the necessity of a comprehensive solution, not of managing the conflict like what happened in the last 15 years. If we are sincere and if we are serious about our intention and our belief that we don't need things like the 7th of October or the things that's happened after the 7th of October to repeat itself again and it happens again, then this is the time for us to actually say that this war must end with a political solution. This war will not end in a victory for neither sides. I don't believe actually that Israel will be able to destroy Hamas, not metaphorically, but even on the military level. I don't think this is an achievable goal. I don't think that Israel will ever kill Palestinian resistance, because resistance will always be there as long as there is oppression. And I don't think that Israel or the Israelis will disappear. I think we're going to live here together, but we have to choose in which way. Either we continue with oppression and killing each other and bloodshed, or that we take responsibility, both sides, and actually come to solutions. And I know that in making solutions, there will be concessions to be made, and there will be hard concessions. But this is what I believe should happen. And I will say the last things that right now, some Palestinians in the peace-building world actually are moving and trying to lobby against, or actually lobby with political ideas. One of those ideas actually is a confederation model between two states. So to have Israel and Palestine, both countries, in a confederation. There is a specific solution that I think is very close to us at Roots and what we have created. It's called Land for All. I can post a link later and actually you can read more about it. But I think this is the right thing to do now with focusing on political ideas. I think it will be much easier to get people around political ideas than actually for dialogue right now. Thank you for listening. I think this is the time for the questions, right?
Yeah, it is. I think I'm just taking a deep breath myself. And I think everyone's expressing their gratitude. So thank you so much, both of you. I really want to uplift and acknowledge the vulnerability and honesty from which you spoke, both the challenges and the hope. And that tension, I think that all of us, I know I'm trying to hold in this time, which is one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you, was we spend so much time in the grief and the anger and the fear. And I really wanted to also bring forth the hope, because that is also an important prophetic task in times of deep despair, is to also offer hope. So as challenging as you both are finding this moment, and as your organization is finding this moment, the fact that you're here and sticking with it and bringing forth hope to all of us is, thank you very much. So we have a bunch of questions, and so I'm going to just ask some of them as we go. So one of the questions has come up, and I'm going to bring some questions together. So Rabbi Hanan, you're a settler in the West Bank, and one of the issues that arises in any future resolution is what's going to happen with the settlers in the West Bank and the ongoing settlements that are happening, particularly under this government. So my question is kind of twofold, one of which is, how do you hold your role as a settler in the West Bank, given the tension that creates for potential peace in the future? And what is your thoughts and perspectives on ongoing settlement building to a potential peaceful outcome?
Thanks for the question. Let me start by saying that I hold in tension two truths. One is that from a historical perspective, the land of Israel is from the river to the sea, as I mentioned, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. And I believe in a reality that expresses that connection, the Jewish connection to the whole land. I think in an ideal world, Jews would be living in the whole land from the river to the sea. And on the other hand, it's crystal clear that today the existence of Jewish life in Judea and Samaria is at the expense of the Palestinian people, and therefore it's wrong and bad and terrible. I would like to see Jewish settlement in the whole land that is part of a reality of equality and human dignity for all, but that's not the situation today. The situation today is that Jewish settlement in the West Bank comes at the expense of Palestinian dignity and Palestinian livelihood and Palestinian security, etc. So the truth is, I moved to where I live almost 40 years ago, before I had the insights I have today. And I don't know if I would make the choice to move here had I stood in front of that choice today. So what do? I could leave. If my wife would let us, she wouldn't. I could leave. And I'd move to Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, perhaps. And the truth is that I'd probably be living in a house or an area that was part of the Jewish dislocation of Palestinians in 1948. In other words, there's injustice wherever you are. Now, of course, there's probably more injustice living where I am now than I'm worried to move to Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. But I'd still be in the thick of it, in the thick of injustice. The reality today is unjust, not just in the West Bank, but it's also in every place you live in Israel. Palestinians are citizens in Israel, but they're not equal. They are second-class citizens on so many levels, which to me tells me that perhaps it would be better to move, I don't know. But the most important thing is to fight against the injustice, to fight against the reality, fight against the discrimination, lack of equality, to fight for reconciliation and peace. And many of my Palestinian partners have told me that if I really believe in that, just about the best place to fight for a better reality for Israelis and Palestinians is to do it in roots. And roots is for Israelis who live in the West Bank. In other words, my Palestinian partners need me more where I live in the West Bank than in Tel Aviv. There's lots of peace activists in Tel Aviv. There's very few peace activists in the West Bank that are working to change the minds and the hearts of the people whose minds and hearts have to be changed, who are the settlers. Roots works in the heart of the conflict. So to make a long story short, perhaps my justification for living where I live is the work of Roots. I'm really needed here, and I hope that I'm accomplishing something.
I think if I can add something to this, to the answer, that I actually intentionally referred to a political model at the end of my presentation, such as the Land for All, because it provide actually, in my opinion, creative solutions to the problems that we are facing today. And these are not just the issue of the settlers, but also Jerusalem, the borders, security, the Palestinian refugees from 1948. And in this initiative, actually, we are talking about two states who have one confederation union between them, and where will actually the citizens of both countries will have the freedom of movement and freedom of residency, which means it will be something like the European Union, where people actually can either live in the state of Palestine or the state of Israel, regardless of their citizenship, of their nationality, and they will vote in their countries, meaning that Israeli settlers can remain, if they want, living in the state of Palestine as Israeli citizens and residents of Palestine, and they vote in Israeli elections. And Palestinians like myself we can go and live in Jaffa or in Haifa or in Tel Aviv as Palestinian citizens and vote in Palestinian elections. I'm not saying this will happen tomorrow or this is so easy like it sounds right now, but I'm saying that we should think about, as I said, we have to make concessions for sure, but also we should think about, we should be thinking out of the box. And I find this model or this idea of land for all or two states for homeland is one of the answers.
And I agree.
Thank you. Thank you both for the answers to that question. It's wonderful to hear. So one of the questions, this question has been asked a few times by a few people to both of you, which is, how have you been received in your communities for your work? Have you been ostracized? Have you been embraced? Probably both and. So if you could each speak to that, please.
Okay, I'll just say a few words. The work we do in Roots is going against the grain of Israeli and Palestinian society, such that until October 7th, I wasn't ostracized, but I think the majority of people think that it's not good, that it's wrong. And since October 7th, I don't say anything because I'm sure that it's not the right time to talk in a society about peace and reconciliation. Let me just tell a short story about this. Every year we have a summer camp, about 40 Israeli kids and 40 Palestinian kids, 80 altogether, elementary school kids. This past summer, the camp was in July. And before the camp, I publicized it on the Alon Shvut email list. Alon Shvut is a settlement I live in of about 2,000, 3,000 people. And I wrote about the camp, bring your kids. And there was one woman who objected, said, this leads to intermarriage. This is terrible. We'll have to go and get our girls from Beit Umar, the local Palestinian village. They'll be beaten there. And this is terrible. And a number of people, 7 or 8, joined this woman on email talking about how terrible the Roots summer camp is. I got a phone call the next day from the rabbi of Alon Shvut, a man I respect greatly. He said that he's been asked to investigate the terrible things Roots is doing. He'd like to invite me for a meeting in his home. And I said to him, instead of me coming to your home, why don't you come to my home? I'll pick you up tomorrow morning. I'll bring you to the summer camp so you can see for yourself. He said, fine. I picked him up. We got to the summer camp. I introduced him to 3 or 4 of the Palestinian counselors. He talked to them in English. He saw the camp was going on. He talked to 1 or 2 of the kids, some of their parents. And then I had him sit down and talk to the leadership of Roots, Israeli and Palestinian, for about an hour. At the end of this, he said, I'm on your side. This is fantastic. I'm going to talk to those people in Alon Shvut and tell them about their mistake. I'm going to bring people to Roots, and I'm going to bring all the rabbis of the area, of the 25 different settlements, to Roots to learn about the wonderful work you're doing. That's an example of good things that can happen. However, the rabbi went on vacation, and then came the Jewish holidays, and then came October 7th. So that's all dead in the water.
So on my side, I didn't really have a lot to share with my community about Roots in the last 1 month and a half. But some of my friends who know about my work and my involvement, they actually were asking me, I think cynically even, like, one of my friends asked me, and he said, like, don't tell me that you are still meeting with your settler friends after what happened. I had actually my mother, both of my father and my mother actually are, like most Palestinians nowadays, are on the news most of the time in our house, in our home. They are watching what's happening in Gaza. They are witnessing the horrific life of the Gazans under the bombing, of the atrocities, children who are losing their families, their entire families. Many children were killed. And yeah, the other day I was sitting with my mother, and she was saying to me something like, I don't believe ever there will be peace between us.
Heard that over and over again, both from Palestinians and Israelis, as well as from those in the diaspora. It's hard to see our way through this moment. So one of the questions that has come up many times is, how can those of us outside of Israel and Palestine be of support to those of you who continue the courageous effort to hold hope and work for peace and justice? You're muted, yeah.
In number one, of course, you can keep up hope. You can continue to meet Jews and Arabs, Jews and Muslims together, continue interfaith dialogue, continue listening to each other, continue religious celebrations together. You can be a model to us. Secondly, you can support us. Hopefully put in the chat another few minutes the Roots website, which is friendsofroots.net. Read about what we're doing. And of course, we need money. We need money to continue our activities. We need money to continue our relief work. In November, we spent $30,000 supporting Palestinians and Israelis who've lost their jobs, 15,000 for each side. We hope to do that again in December. We haven't raised yet that $30,000 we need for December. If some of you are listening to this call have friends in different communities, in different synagogues and universities, you can suggest to them to have Noor and I on a Zoom call. Beyt Tikkun is paying some money for this call. It goes into the Roots coffers. It helps us to continue the work. By the way, it's $600. If we do 4 or 5 Zoom calls like this a week, so more money for the activities, more money for the relief work. Noor and I also going on a US tour in another 2 or 3 months, February 14th approximately to March 14th. We're going to be in about 25, 30 US cities. Every place we speak, in churches and in synagogues and universities, sometimes in mosques, Roots gets a hefty fee, and that all goes to our work. We're hoping to raise $100,000 in our speaking tour through speaking fees and through parlor meetings and people who hear about us and donate money. I'm sorry that I'm talking about money, but really what we need is money to continue activities. They're so expensive because we need translators, we need transportation to bring everyone to the activities. We're going to need to pay a lot of trauma therapists in the coming months, I assume, in order to begin the healing that has to precede any type of serious dialogue. Noor put in the chat the website of A Land for All, the political movement that it perhaps best expresses the people-to-people values of Roots. So support also A Land for All. There's political activity you can do to get their plan on the radar screen of the American government. They have an American Friends of the Land for All movement. I know about it. That's important. I'll also mention another thing that you can do. I assume that the vast majority of the people on this call are Jewish. So if you know Hebrew, learn Arabic. If you know a lot about Israel, learn about Palestine. Watch Palestinian news, read Palestinian books. I personally read Palestinian memoirs. read personal stories of life in Palestine, whether it's in the West Bank or Gaza. Get to feel what it's like to be a Palestinian. Get to know Palestinian identity. And when you come on a visit with your synagogue or your church or your community to Israel, don't just visit Israel, visit Palestine. They're the same land, but see the two sides, hear the two narratives, meet people from both sides. Thank you.
So I agree with everything that Rabbi Hanan said, and I would add, as I said also, that in the heat of the conflict and in the moment people start to talk about Israel and Palestine, until the crisis is over, maybe until the war in Gaza is over, and then people will continue on in their life and forget about it. I do believe that in this conflict there is a role for third party, for Palestinians and Jews in diaspora, also for the international community. And I know I'm not talking to a group of politicians, but I do think that the involvement of governments such as the US government, the European governments is very important here in our conflict and is very effective. And I don't think that right now, the way how these governments are involved is actually helping to improve the situation or helping us to get to a better place. I don't believe this as Palestinian, and as Noor, I don't believe it. So I think that if you could encourage or talk to congressmen or people in the power or decision making, that we must have a political solution. We must have a truthful and sincere political process that would lead to a fair solution between both sides, because we need actually serious peace mediators, governments who are actually interested not in their own politics in the region and for their own interests, but also to help us, the Palestinians and Israelis, to reach into a settlement, into an agreement that allow us to live together. It's unfortunate that we cannot do it on our own. I wish if there's a way that we can do it on our own, but right now it doesn't seem like it. So we need the help from you guys. So if you have any connections or if you have any actually idea, I'm trying also to get like more Palestinians in the US, especially to become more like politically active there and to bring Palestinian voices and to talk about the need for a solution. I have watched a lot of interviews actually on different media platforms, and regardless of your opinion, whether you are pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, I think at the end most of them reached into a conclusion that we need a solution between both sides. We have to have a political solution.
Thank you, Noor. A couple of people were hoping you could post in the chat the links to some of the groups you mentioned, in addition to the Land for All People. So I think you could just do that. That would be easier than me asking you to send it to me and me posting it. That would be great. Thank you. So we're winding up in our time. I guess what I want to just check in is if there are any last words either of you have. I want to thank you on behalf of Beyt Tikkun, on behalf of myself, Rabbi Cat Zavis, and Rabbi Michael Lerner, who's not here today. Thank you so much for being with us today. One of the things that we did was we had a sliding fee scale to this event. And so we have more than covered your fee, and we will give you an additional portion so that some of our additional monies will support your work, but will also support Beyt Tikkun so we can bring more events such as this to our community and to the larger world. So happy that we have an abundance so that we can provide that support to your work. And I just want to say I have so much gratitude and humility for your hearts, your work, the challenge that you are facing in this incredibly difficult time where the traumas of both peoples are so exacerbated that it's so hard to reach across the divide. And yet here you are modeling it and living it. And so for that, we are deeply grateful. So if either of you would like to share any closing words. I know we did not get to everyone's questions. There was a lot of wonderful questions. And I hope that everyone appreciated the depth and richness of our conversation today. Now I'll just turn it over to both of you for last words. Thank you.
Some people have asked me in the chat personally if the Zoom call that Roots is doing on a week from now, on Sunday, if it will be the same as now. And the answer is it'll be a little bit different and a little bit the same. I'm hoping to talk about my own stances and my own vision for the near term and for the future on next Sunday. I didn't talk about my own stances. I mentioned what Palestinians are feeling in Roots, what Israelis are feeling or Roots. I didn't say what I'm feeling. So I will leave that for next week. And in closing, I will just say that we always have to remember that if Israelis don't get today and tomorrow and in the future what they need, want, and deserve, Palestinians won't get what they need, want, and deserve. And if Palestinians don't get what they need, want, and deserve, then Israelis won't get what they need, want, and deserve. We have to find a settlement that supports both sides and that honors the needs and identity of both sides, which means that for me, as an Israeli, I cannot just be pro-Israel. As an Israeli, I have to also be pro-Palestine. And so my final words before Noor has his final words is that we want a growing cadre of Israelis and Palestinians and people around the world who say pro-Palestine and at the same time pro-Israel. That's really the only way to be a better future for both sides.
So thank you everyone for being here with us tonight and hearing from us. And thank you for your support. And I hope that that we will be able to do this work, and that we are going to even find new partners. And I think that partnership today is needed not just only among Palestinians and Israelis on the ground, but also among Palestinian and Israeli peacemakers with people from abroad, people who can help us in our mission. And I hope that you will be our partners. And I think, as I said before, that we must be right now trying to shift the focus and talking about a political solution to this. And it's about taking responsibility. It's about all of us taking responsibility in this war. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you. And I just put in the chat Rabbi Lerner's book, Embracing Israel-Palestine, which has a very comprehensive discussion of the understanding of the traumas, the PTSD of both sides, and it's still relevant today. And the information is in the chat about how you can order a copy. You might be able to find it online in other ways as well. Thank you both so much for your time, for your courage, and for being with us today. Many blessings on your work, and thanks to everyone who came and showed up and listened.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amen.
Rabbi Cat, one quick thing. There are people asking in the chat if the recording of this will be available and how it will.
Yes, we will send it out to everyone who registered.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for asking. Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Many blessings. Shalom, salam.